for something outside of the season and the time appointed by God, we are met with disappointment and we are met with frustration. It doesn't work the way it works when God puts his hand on it. Because again, the scripture tells us that times and seasons belong to the Lord. And so this water, ordinary, all of a sudden the angel comes and stirs it up, and it brings about supernatural power, supernatural favor. That is what happens when you have the knowledge of what you ought to do in a season and you do it. That is why there's some times in life when the Lord is speaking to you about something, there is this sense of urgency. And if you don't quicken, if you don't respond to this urgency, and what you don't realize is because there's a window. And what the enemy does, our pastor was recently teaching us about when he was talking about the different warfares and fighting spiritual warfares and all of that. And he talked about fear, and he talked about how fear is outside of you because you cannot be against yourself. Sometimes the Lord will set before you a window of opportunity. And then all of a sudden the enemy is like, if I can distract you with fear, if I can distract you with the what ifs, if I can distract you with all the things that could go wrong, then it could stall you outside to bring you to a place when you go outside of the appointed time. You see, but what we don't realize is that we feel like we have all the time, right? That we can do anything whenever we want. But that's not the case, because there is a time marked by God. And that's why for some of you watching this right now, there's an instruction that has been placed in your spirit. And actually, it was even placed at the top of this year. And there were things that the Lord showed you that needs to manifest before the end of this year. Look at us. Right now, we've reached the midpoint where we're halfway in the year. And there's some things that the Lord told you to do in the beginning that you still have not yet done. Because every time you want to get to it, you're distracted by fear. And the fear is not even coming from you. The fear is literally just that. It's a distraction. Because as long as the enemy can stall you for the season, for that window of opportunity, then he's fine. That's why if you think back in your life, you think about some of the fears you had, there are moments where it's the feeling of the fear is as heavy as the urgency for what God has called you to do. And then all of a sudden the fear lifts off of you. What you were so terrified about, nothing changed. All of a sudden you woke up one day and you're like, oh, actually I could do this. But what you have lost sight of is that window of opportunity has shifted. So the enemy is like, oh yeah, you doing that is not a threat to me anymore. Times and seasons. It is so imperative that we are connected to God. What does this time represent? And what do I have to do in it? You see, because the beauty in this scripture that we just read, right? The angel of the Lord goes before the people to stir the waters. The angel went before them. It was not that they stepped into the water and they were waiting and they were laboring and you're just like, I don't know what I'm doing. This feels like I'm dancing, right? Like rowing the boat. But they were doing all this stuff waiting for the angel. No, the angel of the Lord went before them. This is the power of an appointed time by God. Because you see, the angels, first of all, we don't pray to angels or worship angels or call unto angels. No, because the scripture tells us that the angels, they are the mighty ones of God who listen to his instruction. They do what God says. So whenever there is a word connected to a season of your life, whenever there was a word connected to a time, the angels go before you because they recognize what that time represents. And they go before you because they are co-laborers with us to make certain that the purpose of God and the will of God through your life will be manifested. So the angel of the Lord went before them to stir the water, and then they could hop in. The first